Well, a secret recording leaked to the public quickened the public safety minister's pulse this week. And after a busy trip to the United Nations, the prime minister returned home to defend his government's gun buyback program and his public safety minister.
But his own Minister of Public Safety says this government is doing it wrong. He was caught on tape saying the program won't work, and yet they are going to rip $750 million away from our border and police services to harass duck hunters and farmers by banning the firearms they use.
What the Minister of Public Safety is doing it right. He's correcting an inefficient system.
The Liberal Public Safety Minister admits that the Prime Minister is only playing politics. Will the Prime Minister stop the politics, fire the Minister, and leave Grandpa Joe's hunting rifle alone?
What the Minister of Public Safety and this government are doing is tightening the border. Bill C2, will the opposition stand up and support the tightening of the border?
Okay, so how's the Prime Minister fared through this political firestorm? Our party insiders are here. Greg McEachern is a former Liberal ministerial advisor. Fred Delory is a former Conservative campaign manager. And Anne McGrath is in from El Riche this week. She, of course, is a former director of the New Democratic Party. That's good to see you all.
Nice to see
Happy
you.
Friday. Greg, it is less this week about the structure of the program and more about the comments of the minister responsible for the gun buyback program. Do you think Gary Nandasangari survives this in the long term?
To be honest, I feel like it's a bit of a wobble. And the thing that I think has helped him the most is that he showed up in places like this studio and took it on the chin. And I'm not sure, in the last, I'd say the last, previous two prime ministers, that was not something that you'd see a lot of. But in terms of the situation itself, it's a bit of a welcome to the big leagues moment. How did you get yourself into this? There's a narrator voice. You may be wondering how I ended up here, kind of moment. And it's not. I don't mean to make light of it. It's not great. I'm a bit old school on this stuff around cabinet solidarity. If you don't support what the government is doing, you can't be a member of cabinet. So I think it is embarrassing and awkward. And the other thing I would say is, and Ann and I were chatting about this outside. The last year the Trudeau government was not their easiest. There were a few additions to cabinet. People were appointed to senior roles. This is a new time, new prime minister. I don't enjoy the Grandpa Joe reference in question period. I don't think that's a serious comment, but I think that the minister has to take a good hard look at the situation he's gotten himself in.
But and there is saying maybe we should have handled this differently politically and all those other things. But there is the offer of compensation if you don't like the price you get for your gun, and the promise of bail support and things like this in the recording. And I just wonder if that brings a whole new flavor to this, right? It's not just being uncomfortable with the policy design, it's a whole bunch of other things.
It's undermining it in a very fundamental way, and in a way that probably isn't even legal. And I really think, we remember when the cabinet was first formed, there was early speculation that he would be one of the first to go. What I hear from people is that he's a very nice guy, very decent person, but this is his second little round of trouble. And this is a very basic one, it seems to me, just very, very basic. So I would say that he does survive it in the short term, but I would not say that he would survive in the long term.
Fred, clearly the Conservatives' season on this, it's tailor-made for Pierre Poilievre, right? Whatever you think of secret recordings of conversations and these sorts of things, there's a lot of that going around, but it is a reality you have to face in politics. Where do you think this one goes?
I think it's going to be incredibly difficult for Carney to keep him in this specific position. He's criticizing a file that he's leading. He's the minister for that file. It's not like he's talking about another minister's portfolio. He's talking about his own, which just makes the problem so much bigger. If you are not only leading it, you're supposed to be the primary spokesperson for it. You got to be defending it. You got to believe in it. And if you're having these conversations with people going way off base on what the actual program is, that's a major problem.
How do you issues manage this? If you're Mark Carney, if you're the people around him, like, how do you keep them there and put scaffolding around them to make this all work?
Yeah, it's really hard because if you remove him right now, then you're admitting defeat immediately, and you're giving Poilievre a win. He's already kind of controlling the narrative this week. Back to that, what we were looking at for the last 2 years when Poilievre did very well. He hasn't really found his footing in the spring at least, but now it looks like he is controlling the narrative a bit. So it is hard to issue manage that. I think they got to try to get through this session as best they can, and then they'll make their shuffle probably in early January.
Well, I guess, Greg, one of the challenges that we did play tape there of the Prime Minister and the opposition leader in question period, but Mark Carney he's been away, and for legitimate reasons. He went to the UN General Assembly. He's in the United Kingdom tonight. I mean, but that does cede a little bit of the ability to drive things in this town to the opposition leader with that kind of a travel schedule.
Yeah, and they're missing, the reason why this was done. Look, I was in university when the Montreal massacre happened. It was horrific to watch, but also provided an unwelcome, but probably necessary understanding of how that happened. And this person targeted women, targeted engineering students, as I was, going to university with those. If you look at Australia had a similar program in 1996 following an awful incident there, and it had very positive results in Australia. And even recently, one of the provinces in Australia has done something like this. They can't point to this when they're talking about what the minister actually said.
This is the fourth Liberal term, though, Greg, and they haven't gotten this thing going. Do you know that we're just getting to a pilot program? I have interviewed minister after minister who have shuffled through the responsibility for this as they ag guns, remove guns, upset gun owners here.
Yeah.
It has not been well managed from an execution standpoint by any objective standard.
And David, look, I don't want to agree with you too much here.
And I'm not holding you accountable.
But I'm
for
also
this.
old enough to remember Ellen Rock, and I remember what it was like to be, a Liberal working the campaigns of '97 and 2000, and the impact how this was. It is this challenge with the Liberal Party where they have large support in urban centres, but it's not all of your support, and that's not all of Canada, and it's trying to figure that out. I mean, Anne, you probably experienced this with people like Charlie Angus, who represented rural areas. This is a really tough urban-rural split issue when it's not managed well. I'm not sure. The reason I'm pointing to Australia is because I think it can be done.
Yes, and maybe that's what they should follow for government execution purposes. I don't know, Anne, but this has been, it's fits and starts and adding to the guns, taking, it's been frantic in some ways.
It's been mishandled over and over and over again. And I do recall when they first started with this particular program that there seemed to be a real lack of understanding about those urban-rural divisions. Like the first list was it was just so extreme, and they didn't know how to defend it, and they were surprised, I think, a little bit by the opposition. Then they had to walk it back. So it's kind of goes backward and forward all the time. The thing I noticed, though, from this week was that it was the Prime Minister that was on his feet defending and attacking. And one of the criticisms I recall of Trudeau was that he was always the one that was kind of in the lead on the attack, and that it actually damaged him in many ways. Right. So I wasn't sure about what about why it would be the Prime Minister that would be out there doing this.
Well, I guess he has to defend his minister, right? Because ultimately he put him in there. But just as a final point on the gun issue, I remember having a conversation with a pretty senior Liberal on this, and when they were banning the SK, it was like a Kalashnikov rifle used in the north. Inuit hunters use it a lot. It's got a lot of stopping power, technically an assault rifle, and they use it to hunt seal. And this was an urban member of Parliament saying, look, if you need a more powerful gun to hunt seal, you don't need a more powerful gun, you need to be a better shot. I'm like, polar bears hunt seal too. Polar bears are in the same area. Like, that is the reality of life in places like Nain and Northern Labrador, right? So it is that urban-rural split. And look, we got another issue where there's a bit of an urban-rural split, and one that is brewing for the Prime Minister as he's out of the country, and that is the Canada Post issue. As Canada Post workers across the country walked off the job yesterday, just hours after the government set out to overhaul the Crown Corporation, and the Canadian Union of Postal Workers said it was outraged and appalled by the changes, which include authorizing Canada Post to end home delivery and close some rural post offices. Fred, the union and management at Canada Post, they got a lot to deal with, a lot to sort out, but these are big moves by the government, this new mandate change, and I just wonder what this signals in terms of what could be coming in the budget.
Yeah, well, it's a huge change of the Liberal position. I ran in 2015 when the Conservatives were closing down door-to-door delivery. It was against Sean Fraser, and I remember getting earful after earful at doors in Stellarton and New Glasgow, which had home delivery, about the changes we were making and how the Liberals were going to reverse that, and they did. Well, 10 years later, they seem to be going back to what the original plan was. It is going to have an impact on a lot of people, and it's going to upset a lot of people. And of course, that gives opportunity for other parties to weigh in there. I don't think Conservatives will, but maybe the NDP could.
So, Anne, speaking of the NDP, I mean, obviously they will probably side with preserving door-to-door. I mean, where do you think this goes, and what signal do you think is coming from the government with this choice?
Well, I think the biggest signal that I can see is a real shift away from the kind of pro-worker rhetoric that we've been seeing over the last little while towards the government being very willing, in my view, to put their thumb on the scale in favor of employers. And it's not just with Canada Post. We saw it with the flight attendants. We saw it, and their also willingness to bypass Parliament to force workers back on the job. So,
well, they forced them off the job with this one, right?
Yeah,
I mean, Jim Glant, announced right there
yeah.
that is happening.
Yeah, totally. And the thing is too that I think workers are noticing this. I mean, I think they're noticing the difference between what's been said over the last probably a couple of years about the importance of workers and labor and all of those kinds of things, and what's actually happening, whether it's Starbucks workers or whether it's postal workers or whether it's flight attendants or whether it's the public service workers. We're seeing it all the time. And the Postal Workers Union has a very storied presence in Canadian labor history, right? I mean, it was the postal workers that went on strike for maternity leave back in the day, and to the point where their leadership went to jail. Jean-Claude Perrault went to jail. So the postal workers have a very special place, I think, in the labor movement in this country, and they're a fairly militant group, and they will take action when they think they have to.
But on that, and look, I'm not taking sides in this, but the mail volumes are what the mail volumes are, right? And what was a rural area, and with the old rules and a rural post office, Richmond Hill, Milton, and these places, I don't know if they're going to close the ones in, say, like St. Anthony on the Northern Peninsula, but these, what were exurb that became suburbs and are now largely urban centers, if they're not being used and if there is a constant deficit, I mean, can you keep it as it is?
I think it's an institution that Canadians value. I think that it provides a service that Canadians want and need, and I think that and the timing of all this is something we haven't talked about that either. But the timing of this announcement, right when they were about to go back into bargaining, and I thought all the way along that it was interesting to me that Canada Post was refusing to come to the table, and I wondered if they were waiting for something like this.
Well, maybe. I mean, I would assume budget probably has some role in this, right? The budget process timing, but I don't know, like, if that's the case, Greg, or not. But it is another issue now where you've got a national strike. It's messing up the mail-in voting in the Newfoundland and Labrador election, municipally and provincially. But you once again have the post office workers for the second time in like 9-10 months on a picket line and labor situation the government's got to deal with.
Yeah, and since the 60s, this is probably well over 20 work stoppages, strikes, and so Canadians start to get immune to it. I really I'm 114 years old. You
don't look a day over 113.
Thank you.
Yeah.
But when and I hate I reveal myself when I tell these stories. But when I was a little kid and I was spending summers with my grandmother, my best friend was a retired man in his 60s, and we checked the mail twice a day.
You Huckleberry Finn?
Yes, I painted fences and things. But I've seen this, their mail used to get delivered twice a day in small towns.
Yeah.
People would check it in the morning and the afternoon.
Yeah.
If I tell this to my nieces, they think, again, that I'm 114. But I think what the Canada Post, the employees have lost is the public. And I remember 2018, and I was working for an online platform that really enabled small and medium-sized businesses in Canada. And these are very small businesses, 1, 2, 3 people.
Right.
And they would do this before Christmas. I remember there was a woman in New Brunswick. She had a candle business. 80% of her business was pre-Christmas. And she was going to lose all that. And at that time, the reason why small businesses like Canada Post, because it was a cheaper option. Tracking was not great.
Yep.
But that has changed. I have photos from that time where the vans were wrapped, delivering more parcels to Canadians than everyone else. Go read the annual reports. They were making money up until about 2014 and 2015 on parcels. They didn't pivot.
Right, but it's the decline in letters and the requirements to still deliver them within 3 to 5 days. This is where the costs come in, and you know, Fred, I wonder, like maybe they've lost, the workers have lost, but I don't know, but it is a national institution, as Ann says, and in this moment, you know what I mean? The people are rallying around those things and wanting to preserve and protect them. I mean, do you see a political risk here for the government if this goes sideways? Does
It's interesting.
the post office count?
I haven't seen any research on where Canadians actually think of Canada Post. You know, we have the anecdotes. We check the mail in my house like once every 2 weeks, it feels like. It's not something we're checking twice a day, definitely not that. You know, we live in an electronic age, so I'm just not sure where they are. It'd be interesting to see where
I
is
figured
the
your
public.
fan mail would be of such volume, you'd be there.
I
all
get
the
a lot
time.
of nasty emails.
People
know how
And
to
I
reach
said
me
I'm
through
sorry.
email.
I said I'm sorry. I will stop.
Yeah. Okay, well, look, the cost cutting there, it may have to do with the overall financial picture because we got a stark warning from the parliamentary budget officer this week. And he expects the coming fall budget will reveal a sharp increase in the federal deficit, as a lot of people do, and one that puts the government's previous fiscal anchors in jeopardy.
We project the budgetary deficit will be $68.5 billion. That's billion with a B. We project the federal debt to GDP ratio will be 42.5% of GDP this year.
How alarming is that for the average Canadian, for the taxpayer? Because there is only one taxpayer, right?
Stupefying, shocking, right? This is not, like, it's not a funny fiscal outlook. It's a really serious fiscal outlook.
Are we closer to where we were in the mid-90s than we were 10 years ago?
The numbers in the mid-90s were far more alarming. If we don't change things, we're going to end up there again.
When do you project the budget to be balanced?
Is that a trick question? a very long time. Again, the current status quo is not sustainable.
Okay, the status quo is not sustainable, and it will change because these numbers, they include some of the $115 billion in net new spending that the government has planned over the next 5 years. They don't include that 5% of GDP in defense spending to hit the NATO target, so that's a whole chunk of cash. So, Ann, when you look at this, you read the PBO report, there is the spending from the election platforms, there is the weakening of revenue, and it is all Donald Trump, is what they flat out say there. But you can see the choices that this government faces with a budget about 5-6 weeks away. I mean, what do you make of that forecast, and where do you think that leaves the government?
Well, it's interesting. I've been looking at the Conservative strategy on all of this, and I think that they miscalculated it to some extent because they were putting out there that it could be, some of them were putting out there that it could be as high as $100 billion, which actually, kind of gives the government a little bit of wiggle room, right? So they've been exaggerating it so much that it's unbelievable. And then the other thing that they've been putting out there is that the PBO is compromised in some way because of the fact that it's not a permanent, he hasn't been named permanently.
That didn't sound like a guy who was afraid to say stuff.
It did not sound like that at all.
Sure didn't.
So I feel like they're kind of I feel like the Conservatives are misfiring on this. I think that Canadians are going to be probably alarmed at the size of the deficit. But I think if it was $25 billion or $65 billion, most Canadians are more concerned about the cost of their groceries, the cost of their rent and their mortgages. Those are the kinds of things that are really and sometimes these kind of big macro things are not, like I hear businesses talking about it a lot. I hear pundits and everybody on the Hill talking about it a lot. But I think around kitchen tables and in families, in homes, people are more concerned about those kinds of things, and I think that's where the budget's going to be a real problem, I think, for people. Because, and we're already seeing so many job losses. We're seeing things like cuts in services, and I think that's going to have a real impact on the everyday person.
Right, but Greg, like most people may not sit around their kitchen tables, and maybe around like this one, and talk about the macro stuff. But if the macro numbers get worse, the micro is going to get really bad, right? Because, you remember, because you're 114 years old, the situation in the 90s with the bond markets knocking on the door because of the size of the deficits, it led to like serious downsizing and economic hardship for a lot of people as they fix it. It's not there yet, but you can see the urgency to get there, while at the same time, there's these competing demands to invest and move and get infrastructure going and build out ports and build out the military. So there's cost pressures on this side. So where do you think it goes?
Yeah, and I'm old enough to have worked for a government that did balance the budget. Hello, Fred. But there's a couple of things here. First of all, GDP numbers for July were better than folks expected. I look forward to Peter Armstrong's Monday morning email to tell me what this really means.
I am actually shocked to see they're projecting growth.
Yeah.
Economic growth of 1.2%. Like, I figured we would definitely be in full contraction. But sorry, go ahead.
And I thought the language and style of the PBO was kind of interesting because last week, and I don't think a lot of people noticed this, he announced that his office would reduce their budget and he would take a cut in salary. Right. And I think he recognizes that his predecessor, who was here in the spring of 2024, who got the numbers really wrong on carbon pricing, he knows that that office that was a lot of damage. Yep. And that was very colorful language there. And so if they're wrong, and there's some other things that are, interesting. Tiff Macklin did a big speech in Saskatchewan earlier this week, and he talked about the 3 areas where Canada needed to start to move. And one was interprovincial trade, especially around labor mobility.
Sure.
Big projects around infrastructure, ports. And then the other one was following the recession in 2009. We knew then that we needed to move on from a dependence on the United States. We didn't. Chrystia Freeland talked about this during the first term of Donald Trump, and then the pandemic hit. So there are some things there that they have to do. And also, you've got a guy as Prime Minister that this is his brand. He's going to be able to point to what he's inherited. He's going to be able to point to what Trump is doing.
Right.
But he's going to have some projections that are showing that this is why he was brought in.
Right. I mean, but Fred, this is a tough picture, right? Like I know COVID, the debt doubled during COVID, and you can argue over that, but that was a black swan event. I know what Trump is doing is also a black swan event, but the direction of this with the ambition of the Carney agenda, there's a collision here, and something will have to give at a certain point.
And the politics of it, we have a budget in a few weeks. Who's voting for it? It's a minority parliament.
Good point.
We have
the Liberal Conservative coalition. Is that not what's going to happen
with
there, Fred?
massive deficits?
Right?
I don't think we'll be seeing Conservatives in any way ever supporting this, or the other way another party could try to get through this is abstaining and not voting. You just need one party to do that out of the 3 opposition parties. I don't see in any way the Conservatives can do anything but vote against this budget. So the Bloc Québécois, you can never trust them. I've had a history myself with them. You never know what they're going to do. And I believe Blanchette said a week or 2 ago he's not going to vote for the budget. So it leaves the NDP. If this is an austerity budget, if there's going to be all these massive cuts, can they vote for this budget? I'm not predicting the government is going to fall in a few weeks, but I just don't know the politics of this. Who is going to vote for this budget out of the 3 opposition parties?
Well, look, we'll book you now for the election specials that we're going to be doing, because it sounds like, but it is an interesting point because, and there's no Jagmeet Singh and no supply and confidence agreement. I remember Mark Carney at his first press conference after the election, he was asked, will you seek a governing arrangement with the NDP? He said no. And the follow-up was, why not? And he said, why? Right? So that tells us about an intention to govern as if there's a majority and advance the agenda. So how do you think this plays out in Parliament?
Well, I think that I can't see any way that the NDP would vote for an austerity budget, and that's the kind of budget that we're looking at.
Could they abstain?
I don't know what they would do, but I know one of the things that I'm hearing a lot is that because the NDP is so weak, they won't want an election. But my kind of take on that is, what do you have to lose?
Yeah.
Like when things are this dire and things
7
are
seats,
dire,
maybe. I don't know.
I think you could make the argument that
you could get party status,
that the 7 MPs that won under the circumstances of the last election are pretty good, and we can see that, right? Yep. And I think if an election was held next week, we would have more seats.
And you also have this position where they need to break away from that Trudeau-Jagmeet Singh deal that was there for so long. They have to stand up and show that they are different than the Liberal Party. So abstaining or voting with them doesn't do that.
And the Carney government is very different from the Trudeau government. Very different, right? This is we've said many times, a very conservative-leaning government. So why would the NDP feel inclined to support it?
So, Greg, what do you do if you're the Liberals? You had to deal with these numbers eventually, right? You could go through COVID and deal with things, but there were structural deficits going into the pandemic, and they remain there coming out of the pandemic. And a lot of it is redistribution of tax money to Canadians. And I'm not judging those programs, but they're not the sort of spending to create growth that Mark Carney wants to do. So what do you do in terms of seeking a partner, or do you just implement your plan and let the chips fall?
Notwithstanding Fred's lack of trust for the BQ, I think the challenge, what I would try to be doing from a communications point of view is, do the Bloc want to support Pierre Poilievre, who is not all that popular in Quebec? Conservatives are not all that popular right now, and enforce an election if they support them, or do they want to continue going on? That would be one angle. I have heard some conversations about folks from the Conservatives talking to people about, you should abstain on this. It may end up that the Conservatives may have to have a case of the blue flu. Some of them won't be there. But
I really hope that as a Conservative, the party doesn't take that position, because I think that's voting for the budget if you do that.
They seem energized.
It's way too cute.
Yeah. Like they seem to have an energy with Pierre Poilievre back, right? Like an abstention. They'll get called out on that. That will be a narrative.
You're supporting the budget if you keep
You're giving them a pass.
The other challenge, though, as Fred spoke a couple of weeks ago, is Poilievre trying to grow his support with Canadians, or is he focused on the leadership review? There was a poll this summer, I think it was Ipsos, that said that 68% of Conservatives were happy with Poilievre. Well, that's the same number that Merritt Stiles got. And it's not been, CBC describes that
But that
as
wowon't be the numbers that go to a delegated convention.
I absolutely, but they're the numbers I have right now.
No, I understand.
And that's the thing that I'd be watching.
But your argument on the Bloc, like I don't know what the seat-by-seat dynamic looks like right now in Quebec, but if you're Mr. Blanchet, a weakened minority government of any stripe and a stronger Bloc Québécois is a better position for him, is it not? If the budget is something that's
and define strength. So if you have a meeting with the Prime Minister and you get some concessions from the budget, and you're able to say that as the Bloc leader, that may be strength.
Right. So, Anne, how do you see that?
We've also seen that the Bloc leader, when he negotiates, at least what we saw in the last Parliament, it's kind of out of this world, right? Like some of the things that he asked for last time he was in this position were a little bit out of control, right? So, I mean, I think you also have to be able to negotiate. You do have to get, if you're going to have an opposition party that supports the budget or abstains or whatever it is that they end up doing, they would have to get something for it.
Right. But just on that, in the last Parliament, Justin Trudeau's numbers, I mean, the Liberal Party was bleeding out on the floor, and the Conservatives had just spent millions of dollars attacking Jagmeet Singh. So the relative strength of everybody, in the fall of 2024 is very different than where we are right now, right? So, can we draw a lesson from that, do you think, or is it just too different?
I think it's a different situation now. I mean, I think that, we did get through an election and Trump was a big factor, and Trump is still a big factor. I know everybody's sort of saying that he is still a very big factor on Canadians' minds. And I also believe, as we were talking about earlier, that there is an imbalance in labor and employers and employees at the moment. And so I think an austerity budget where it is workers that primarily pay the price and Canadians who pay the price because of the decline in services is going to be a big problem.
Well, on that labor issue, we saw people like Lana Payne from Unifor side by side with Mark Carney, places like Kitchener during the election. I don't know if you're going to see that now after what has happened on some of the labor front, even if there is alignment on the auto stuff. Fred, I'm going to give you the last word. I mean, do you think they find a partner, or do you think they just lay down the budget and go?
It's interesting because Carney on election night didn't seem interested at all in looking for a partner, so I don't know what his approach will be. I do not think we'll have an election, so somehow we're going to avoid that. I just don't know the mechanics and who's going to be the one to fold.
To fold or compromise or pull together for national unity? I mean, anything is possible.
I just don't see the incentive. I don't see the incentive.
Well, we haven't seen the budget, so we don't know yet, right? I mean, there could be things. Well, November 4th, we will find out, and then maybe we'll have a sense of where it's going to go. But I expect a lot of posturing between now and then. Greg McEachern, Fred Delory, Anne McGrath, thank you all so much.